Hello students, this online lecture is on the topic female reproductive system. In this lecture, I will discuss about the basic anatomy of female reproductive tract, which will include ovaries, its functions, and oogenesis. I will also discuss about the female hormones estrogen and progesterone, then indicators of ovulation, and then details regarding the menstrual cycle. So let us start the session with full concentration and enthusiasm. The female reproductive system comprises of internal and external genitalia. The female internal genitalia includes two ovaries, two fallopian tubes, one uterus and one vagina. The external genitalia of female includes the mons pubis, labia majora and minora, the clitoris and the vestibule of vagina. Let us see one by one the organs of female internal genitalia. First in the list is uterus. Uterus is a hollow, thick-walled muscular organ which is situated between the urinary bladder and the rectum. It can be divided into a body that forms the upper two-third part of the uterus and a cervix that forms the remaining one-third part. This is a diagram showing the female internal genitalia. This is the uterus, the vagina, the cervix, fallopian tubes. Under the fallopian tubes you can see the ovaries. The uterus has an upper part called as the fundus. The fundus continues downwards to form the cervix. The prepubertal uterus is small, that weighs approximately 10 to 15 grams, whereas the postpubertal uterus becomes pear-shaped and weighs around 30 to 60 grams. And when the uterus is pregnant, it can weigh up to 0.8 to 1 kgs. The uterine cavity is triangular in shape and has three openings. Two openings sideways for the fallopian tubes and one opening downwards for the internal os. The internal os opens into the cervical canal and external os. When you see the structure of the uterus from inside, you can see that the body of the uterus consists of three layers, namely perimetrium, myometrium, and endometrium. Perimetrium is the outermost serous layer. It covers only the upper 3/4 of the uterus. The myometrium is the middle layer, that is thick and made up of smooth muscles. And the endometrium is the innermost mucous membrane layer of the uterus that consists of two layers, an epithelial lining and a stroma. Epithelial lining layer is made up of columnar cells and the stroma is highly vascular. Functionally, the endometrium of uterus can be divided into two strata or layers, stratum functional and stratum basale. The stratum functional includes the superficial two-third thickness of the endometrium. This layer undergoes cyclic changes and shedding every month by the process called as menstruation. Stratum basale is the deeper one-third layer of the endometrium. It does not go under cyclic changes and shedding every month, but functions as a regenerative layer. This part is supplied by many short and straight basal arteries. The next female internal genitalia is cervix. Cervix is the cylindrical lower part of the uterus that protrudes into the upper vagina. It is approximately 2.5 cm long in a non-pregnant woman. The mucosa of cervix is called as endocervix. The part of uterus doesn't undergo monthly shedding. The cervical secretions contains approximately 92% of water, salt and glycoproteins. Cervix serves some important functions. Cervix allows the entry of sperms from vagina into the uterus and stores them for 1 to 2 days. It allows the menstrual wreckage to escape from the uterus. It permits the passage of fetus during delivery, and it prevents the entry of infections into the female reproductive tract. Next is fallopian tubes. There are two fallopian tubes or oviducts on either side of the uterus. Each uterine tube is approximately 10 cm in length. It has a medial end which is attached to uterus and a lateral end that opens into the peritoneal cavity near ovary. Each fallopian tube can be further divided into four parts, namely uterine or interstitial part, which is the medialmost part, the isthmus, which is a narrow and part next to the uterine part, the ampulla, and the infundibulum, which is a funnel-shaped lateral end opening into the finger-like projections called as fimbriae. The next important organ of female internal genitalia is a pair of ovaries. Ovary is located behind and below the fallopian tubes on each side. They weigh around 10 to 20 grams during reproductive years, and with increasing age their weight decreases. Ovaries perform two major functions in female. Firstly, they produce and discharge female gametes ova every month, and secondly, they secrete the female hormones or ovarian hormones, namely estrogen and progesterone. Ovaries are the site where oogenesis, that is the process of formation of ova, takes place. Histologically, each ovary consists of a germinal epithelium which lines the outer surface of ovaries, a cortex which is the outer thick part of the ovarian substance, a medulla which is the inner small part of the ovarian substance, and a hilum, an area where ovary attaches to the mesentery. This diagram shows the histological picture of ovary in various stages of development of the follicles. This is the germinal lining. Then this is the centermost part is the medulla, and the surrounding part is the cortex. This is the hilum. These are the developing ovarian follicles. Now let us see how oogenesis takes place. You all know the fact that ova or female gamete starts to form in a female fetus as early as 9th week of intrauterine life. These ova form from the primitive oogonia that starts to multiply freely by the process of mitosis around 9th week of intrauterine life till 7th month of intrauterine life. By term, that is, when the girl fetus is ready to be delivered, all the oogonia gets converted into the primary oocytes, which further converts into primary follicles after the granulosa cell layer is complete. Therefore, from birth, there are many primordial follicles already present under the ovarian capsule. At puberty, every month one or more of the primordial follicles start maturing to become primary follicles, but only one reaches the final stage of maturation while others degenerate. Focus at this flowchart that depicts the steps of oogenesis. During the intrauterine life, at about 10th week, the primitive oogonia proliferate by mitosis to form primary oocytes. The diploid primary oocytes become enveloped by a single layer of granulosa cells and becomes the primordial follicle. The first meiotic division starts right away during the intrauterine life, which converts the diploid oocytes into haploids, but it remains incomplete as arrested in the prophase phase of cell division till the puberty. At puberty, these primary oocytes complete their first meiotic division and become secondary oocytes with the exclusion of first polar body. At this stage, second meiotic division starts immediately but again stops at metaphase state and remains incomplete. The second meiotic division is completed only after fertilization, that is, when the secondary oocyte is fertilized by a sperm. Now understand how the growth of the follicles takes place inside an ovary. These changes are termed as ovarian cycle. You know that the initial form of the follicle is primordial follicle, which are in total about 3 lakhs in both the ovaries at puberty. Each primordial follicle contains one primary oocyte. These primordial follicles, under the influence of female hormones, especially estrogen, grows further and become primary and then secondary follicles. Later, when the granulosa cell starts secreting the follicular fluid and forms an antrum containing liquor folliculi, they become tertiary follicle. And finally, on about 7th day of the female sexual cycle, one tertiary follicle rapidly increases in size to form a mature Graafian follicle. This Graafian follicle will release the mature oocyte during ovulation. Ovulation is a process that occurs at approximately around 14th day of female sexual cycle. It is the release of ovum from the Graafian follicle. High levels of luteinizing hormone called as LH surge at the 14th day of monthly cycle is responsible for ovulation. After ovulation has occurred, the ovum is picked up by the fimbriae of uterine tube and sent to the uterus. In the uterus, the ovum waits for few days for fertilization to occur in arrested metaphase stage of second meiotic division. If fertilization does not occur, the formed corpus luteum regresses after 24th day of sexual cycle, whereas if fertilization occurs, the corpus luteum continues to grow for few months and degenerates at 6th month of pregnancy. Corpus luteum secretes the female hormones progesterone and estrogen. Now, for a female, knowing the time of ovulation becomes very important when she plans for conception or decides family planning. There are various methods available which can help her in this regard, and these methods are called as indicators or tests of ovulation. The very first method or test of ovulation is recording the basal body temperature and predicting ovulation. The test is based on the fact that the basal body temperature falls slightly by 0.3 to 0.5 degrees Celsius just prior to ovulation and increases slightly after ovulation. This rise happens due to the rise in progesterone level after ovulation. Thus, by measuring the morning oral or rectal or vaginal temperature, a woman can have an idea of her ovulation period. Next test of ovulation is Fern test, also called as cervical mucus test. Here, a cervical mucus sample is taken and a smear is made on a slide. When it is examined under a microscope and a fern-like pattern is observed, it suggests that the lady is in her proliferative phase of sexual cycle and is in her ovulation period. This pattern is absent in other phases. Next test or indicator is ultrasonography. This is one of the best methods to find out and even record the process of ovulation. Next indicator is plasma hormones level. The plasma concentration of follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone plus estrogen progesterone is measured during the mid period of the cycle. If luteinizing hormone and estrogen levels are high and the follicle stimulating hormone level is low, it suggests that the time period of ovulation is there. Another very good test of ovulation is by measuring the urine hormone concentration. If urinary level of estrogen is increased, it suggests that ovulation is happening. Also, increased byproducts of progesterone hormone in urine suggest that ovulation has just occurred. Next topic is ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone. The endocrine function of the ovaries is to produce female sex hormones, namely estrogen and progesterone. Let us first see the features and functions of estrogen hormone. Estrogens are steroid hormones. All forms of this hormone are derived from cholesterol. The physiologically active forms of estrogen are 17-beta estradiol, which is the most potent form, then estrone and estriol. In females, the major source of estrogen are the ovarian follicles of ovary. Other sources are adrenal cortex in both the sexes, And when a female is pregnant, estrogen is also produced by the placenta. Estrogen is secreted in huge amount during puberty, which causes various changes in a female. Estrogen promotes the growth of internal genitalia in female. It causes the growth of uterus, ovaries and vagina. It completes the ovarian cycle and causes ovulation to occur. Estrogen enlarges the myometrium muscle fibers and also makes it more sensitive to oxytocin hormone. It is responsible for making the cervical mucus copious and watery. Estrogen increases the motility of the muscle coat of uterine tubes. It thickens the vaginal epithelium, increases the vaginal secretions, and makes the vaginal pH more acidic. Estrogen promotes the growth of external female genitalia by causing enlargement of the labia minora and majora and growth of the clitoris. Estrogen is responsible for the appearance of secondary sexual characters like development of breast and female type body and pubic hair pattern, fat deposition at hips, etc. Estrogen influences the gonadotropin secretion. In small doses, estrogen acts directly on the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland to inhibit the secretion of FSH and LH via negative feedback mechanism. Whereas in large doses, estrogen increases the responsiveness of pituitary gland to GnRH and thus increases the secretion of LH and FSH via positive feedback mechanism. Estrogen also play an important role throughout pregnancy till parturition. Estrogen has a tendency to bring plasma cholesterol levels to lower limits and it increases the plasma thyroxine and cortisol binding protein. Estrogen is very important for the growth of bones. Synthetic forms of estrogen are usually used for making oral contraceptive pills and for the treatment of menopause. The next important female hormone is progesterone. It is also a steroid hormone like estrogen and it is called the hormone of pregnancy. Prostagen and gestagen are other names for progesterone. In a normal non-pregnant female, progesterone is mainly secreted by the corpus luteum, which is formed every month. While in pregnant female, the source of progesterone becomes the placenta. Testis in males and adrenal cortex in both the sexes also produce a small amount of progesterone. It is the hormone of luteal phase and thus it increases 20 times during the luteal phase of menstrual cycle. Like estrogen, progesterone has also got many important functions. Progesterone is responsible for the secretory phase of endometrial cycle and prepares the endometrium to receive the zygote or implantation. It makes the cervical secretions thick and viscid. It causes lobular and alveolar growth of the breasts. It decreases the sensitivity of myometrium to oxytocin and thus decreases the uterine motility. It increases the basal body temperature due to the thermogenic effect. It inhibits ovulation by inhibiting the release of LHRH from hypothalamus. In large doses, progesterone causes natriuresis. Synthetic forms of progesterone is used for the preparation of oral contraceptive pills. It is also given to those women during pregnancy who suffer repeated abortions. Next topic is the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is also called as uterine or endometrial cycle. It is defined as the recurrent monthly changes that occur in the uterus leading to discharge of blood from the female genital canal. The Latin meaning of menses is a month. A regular menstrual cycle should be of 28 days, but duration from 21 to 35 days is also regarded as normal. Less than 21 days or greater than 35 days cycle is considered as abnormal. The human menstrual cycle is counted from the day on which menstruation, that is bleeding from vagina, begins. The cycle can be divided into four phases, namely the menstrual phase, which is from day 0 to 5th day, proliferative or pre-ovulatory phase, that is between 6th to 14th day, ovulatory phase, that is the 14th day, and secretory or post-ovulatory phase, which is from day 15th to 28th day. Let us see what happens normally in the first phase of menstrual cycle. If the released ovum does not fertilize, it leads to removal of all the contents with blood in the form of menstrual bleeding. During this phase, the hormones estrogen and progesterone levels fall down drastically due to degeneration of the corpus luteum. Two-third layer of the endometrium is sloughed off due to the spasm of the spiral arteries in the absence of hormones. This phase usually lasts till 4 to 5 days. The next phase of menstrual cycle is the proliferative phase or the estrogenal phase. The duration of this phase is 6th to 14th day. All the restoration work of the endometrium from the previous damage takes place during this phase. The estrogen level starts increasing due to its secretion from the developing follicles under the influence of FSH. The LH level remains low. The endometrium of the uterus becomes thicker and thicker until it becomes approximately of 4 mm. The uterine glands increases in size. The cervical secretions also increase in volume and becomes alkaline and watery. Next comes the ovulatory phase, that is the 14th day of the cycle. Due to excessive increase in the estrogen hormone, estrogen surge occurs which causes the LH surge, that is peak secretion of luteinizing hormone. This LH surge exactly occurs on a day before ovulation followed by ovulation. The cervical mucus is also the thinnest at this time and so that sperms can easily swim towards the ovum. The last phase of menstrual cycle is the luteal or the secretory phase. This phase extends from day 15 to day 28. All the work for preparation of the uterus for implantation or growing a fetus takes place in this phase. In this phase, the hormone progesterone level increases as the corpus luteum has been developed by this time. This phase is fixed 14 days when counted from the day of ovulation. The thickness of the endometrium is the maximum, that is 6 mm at this time. The endometrial glands become tortuous and filled with mucus. The spiral arteries become more coiled and dilated and the cervical secretions become thick. Now let us see how the female sexual cycle is controlled by the various hormones. The menstrual cycle is regulated by the hypothalamo-hypophyseal gonadal axis. This axis is simply an interaction between the hypothalamus, that is brain, pituitary gland and ovaries. Hypothalamus regulates the secretion of gonadotropins, namely FSH and LH, through gonadotropin releasing hormone. In this case, it is LHRH, that is luteinizing hormone releasing hormone. LHRH acts on the anterior pituitary gland and stimulates it to release gonadotropins FSH and LH. The main aim of FSH and LH is to prepare the endometrium each month for pregnancy. The FSH released from the anterior pituitary cells acts on the ovaries to cause development of the follicles. The developing follicles start secreting estrogen at around 12th to 13th day of the cycle and estrogen surge occurs. This is a positive feedback effect of estrogen that acts on the pituitary gland and causes it to release more luteinizing hormone. Ultimately, the LH surge occurs at 14th day of menstrual cycle and causes ovulation. While ovulation, the estrogen level decreases by its negative feedback effect on the pituitary gland and hypothalamus. This further inhibits the release of FSH and LH from the pituitary. Once the corpus luteum is formed, it produces progesterone and estrogen hormones, and they further cause the inhibition of the release of FSH and LH by negative feedback mechanism. This finishes today's online session. In the next sessions, I will discuss about pregnancy and lactation. Thank you.